Raudhah Rozali, and today I will be presenting on one of the publication by FATF, which is virtual asset. As we all know, in today's world, all businesses are moving to digitalization, and many people around the world are using virtual asset to transfer value or making payments. And this kind of transactions are becoming more popular day by day. So first, I will explain what is virtual asset. According to FATF, virtual asset is a digital representation of value that can be digitally traded or transferred or can be used for payment or investment purposes. But it doesn't include the digital representation of fiat currencies. And the most common example of virtual asset is Bitcoins. There are a few benefits and drawbacks of virtual asset. The first benefit is that virtual asset help to make payment easier, faster and cheaper. And it also provides alternative method for people that do not have access to regular financial products such as cash or credit cards. Next, the drawbacks of virtual asset is misuse of virtual asset for money laundering and terrorist financing. And virtual assets are also exposed to becoming a virtual safe haven for the financial transaction of criminals and terrorists. This is because there are no proper regulation that being implemented to safeguard virtual assets. Moving on, this is how the criminals misuse the virtual asset. In 2017, there was WannaCry ransomware attack which held thousands of computer systems hostage until the victim paid the hackers a ransom in Bitcoins, and the attack resulted in an estimated of $8 billion in damages to hospitals, banks and businesses around the world. Luckily, the authorities managed to stop the WannaCry hackers before they can convert the virtual asset. This is the process of how the hacker misuse virtual assets. First, the computers are infected with a virus that disables their businesses, even hospitals, until a ransom is paid. Then the victim will pay the hackers a ransom in Bitcoin to decrypt their computers and continue their activities. Then each ransom payment will go into a publicly identified Bitcoin wallet, and multiple transactions will convert the payment from one virtual asset to another virtual asset in order to remove all links that related to the crime. Then the hacker will send the clean Bitcoin to service provider or banks to convert the virtual asset into fiat money. Then the hacker will receive the Bitcoins in the currency of their choice, and it's ready to be invested in a bank. However, during the WannaCry ransomware attack, the authorities managed to stop the WannaCry hackers before they could convert the ransom payment. And if the WannaCry hackers successful, they would have received a fraction of the damage amount they caused, that amounted to $100 million. Therefore, FATF has been monitoring the development in the crypto sphere, and in recent years, they have seen the first countries that start to regulate virtual asset sector. However, some countries still do not take any action, and some countries have prohibited virtual asset altogether. Examples of countries that have prohibited virtual asset are China, Russia, as well as Malaysia. FATF has issued global binding standards to prevent the misuse of virtual asset for money laundering and terrorist financing with the support from the G20. The standard ensures that virtual assets are fairly treated, applying the same safeguard as the financial sector. And the FATF standards is applied when virtual assets are exchanged for fiat currency and when they are transferred from one virtual asset to another virtual asset. The FATF standard was issued in June 2014, and the latest amendment was made in June 2019. So this is the timeline on how the development of the standard. So the first standard was issued in June 2014 regarding virtual currencies, key definitions, and potential anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financial risk in response to emergence of virtual currencies and their associated payment mechanism. Then, in June 2015, FATF issued the guidance for risk-based approach to virtual currencies as part of a staged approach to address the money laundering and terrorist financing risks associated with the virtual currencies payment, product and services. As the virtual asset market keeps on evolving, FATF recognized the need for further clarification on the application of the FATF standards to virtual asset and the service providers. Therefore, in October 2018, FATF adopted two new glossary definitions, which are virtual asset and virtual asset service providers, and they also update Recommendation 15. And the latest amendment was made in June 2019, where they insert an interpretive note that set out the application of FATF standards to virtual asset activities and service provider. And they also agreed to undertake 12-month review of the changes that need to be completed by June 2020 in order to monitor the progress and the implementation of the new standard, and also to identify any potential changes that need to be made to the standard. Last but not least is what action that need to be taken in order to prevent the misuse of virtual asset. Therefore, countries need to implement FATF standards to ensure the transparency of virtual asset transactions and keep funds with link to crime and terrorists out of cryptosphere. Besides that, when countries implementing the standard for virtual asset service provider sector, it will increase the trust in blockchain technology that act as the backbone behind a robust and viable means to transfer value, because before this, many virtual asset service providers are perceived as risky business because there are no proper regulation to safeguard this sector. And moreover, FATF has revised its assessment methodology, which set out how it will determine whether the countries have successfully implemented the FATF recommendation and regulating the virtual asset service provider sector accordingly. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Siti Syazwani Binti Zulkifli. So today I'm going to present about the second subtopic of virtual asset, which is how the FATF standards apply. But first, let me tell you what is FATF. FATF is actually a financial action task force, which is it combats the money laundering. Okay, before we go further into the how the FATF standards apply, let me define what is actually the FATF standards. FATF standards is actually a global binding standard to prevent the misuse of virtual asset for money laundering and terrorist financing. There are several recommendations that FATF provide in the standards. For instance, assessing risk and applying risk-based approach. Second is money laundering offense, terrorist financing, preventive measures, and etc. Okay, next we go to the importance of FATF standards. Why do national authorities and virtual asset service providers need to follow the standards? And this is why. First, it ensures that virtual assets are treated fairly by applying the same safeguards as the financial sector, as the other financial sectors have been applied. And second, it ensures that virtual asset technologies business can actually continue to grow and innovate in a responsible way, not in a wrong way. And last one, it will prevent the criminals or the terrorists who seek out to exploit the jurisdiction when there is no or weak supervision. And that is why both countries and virtual asset service providers need to follow the standards and need to do the regulation. So yeah, there will be strong supervision to avoid about the money laundering and terrorist financing. Okay, in order to make sure that the standards are really applied, the countries need to play their role. What the country can do is they can understand the money laundering and terrorist financing risks that the sector might face by this they can know what's the future challenges that might happen, and by that they can combat and deal with it successfully. And second is they have to license or register the virtual asset service providers to make sure only the legit one and only the registered one can carry out the transaction. And third is they have to supervise the sector, same as they supervise other financial institutions, and by this they can actually know the sector is doing, and they can ensure that they are following the correct rules and regulation about how they applied. Okay, not only the countries that have to play the roles to make sure the standards apply, but the virtual asset service providers itself need to do some measures to make sure that the standards really apply. First, they can implement the same preventive measures as other financial institution implemented, such as they can do the customer due diligence, they can save the record keeping, and they can report any suspicious transactions that occurred. And second, they also can obtain, hold, and security transmit the originator and the beneficiary information when there are transfers happen. Next part is about where will the regulation happen. Okay, as we can see, when it comes to traditional bank, we can see the brick and mortar headquarters, and the client is actually based near them, near its office. But in other hand, the virtual asset service providers often have their presence and client base that spans the globe. It's around the world. So where will actually the regulation happen? The answer is the country which incorporate the virtual asset service provider as a company, and that will be the regulator and the supervisor. For example, country A, country B, and country C. Country A, who regulate the company as a virtual asset service providers, will be the regulator and the supervisor. Okay, regulating the virtual asset service providers can be challenging to all. Therefore, FATF encourage the national authorities and the virtual asset service providers to actually building their relationship and play their own roles to make the regulation happen. And national authorities, they need to develop skill to understand the technology involved in the sector. And the virtual asset service providers itself, they have to learn about the financial rules that now apply to their sector. They cannot do the business based on their own preference. They have to follow the rules and regulations. And FATF, in order to make sure they build their relationship, FATF has developed a risk-based approach guidance and also hosting annual forums since 2017. A risk-based approach guidance that FATF developed, the guidance explains on how to understand the risk, how to license and register the sector, and what the sectors need to do to know their customers, to store information, and to detect and report any suspicious information. Okay, I think that's all from our group. Thank you.